Blog Talk Radio.
Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. I sense your presence. And I am the light within your soul. In the essence of truth and right, love makes the circle whole. And here we stand in line, waiting for some sacred sign. But to find the balance is the purpose of this time. To restore the balance of the universal mind. And in the presence of my Lord of light and love, everything I see aspiring to be free. And when I call to thee, and come on bended knee, surrender to the all-pervading light and love. Reflections of the one surrounding me with love. And I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. Within and without, above and below, yeah. East, west, north, and south, I sense your presence. Without and within, below and above, yeah, yeah. East, west, north, and south, I sense your presence. I sense your presence. In the presence of my Lord of light and love, everything I find in tune with the divine. And here we stand in line, waiting for some sacred sign. But to find the balance is the purpose of this time. To restore the balance of the universal mind. And I am the light within your soul. In the essence of truth and right, love makes the circle whole. And when I call to thee, and come on bended knee, surrender to the all-pervading light and love. Reflections of the one surrounding me with love. For to find the balance is the purpose of this time. To restore the balance of the universal mind. And I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. Om Shabbat Shalom, Holy Way of the Most High. Om Shabbat holy angel of the Most High. Om Shabbat Shalom, I sense your presence. I sense your presence.
Thank you for joining me tonight here on Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. My name is Jessie Ann Nichols George, and I am your hostess. The music you were listening to at the beginning of the show there is called I Sense Your Presence. It's by Shemshai, wonderful group that I met when I was living in the Arizona area, who's now traveling worldwide, playing concerts, creating new CDs constantly. I just want to say welcome, whether you're joining us here for the first time or whether you are returning to our show. Here at Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour, what I do is I look at different ways that compassion exists in our lives, how to remove our blocks, resistances, frustrations, and more. Some weeks I'm discussing different aspects of how compassion is in and affects our life and the different areas of compassion. Some weeks I'm focusing more on exercises and practical implementations, and most of the time this year I've got great guests on the show that you can learn about their work and other things that complement compassion and will work well with compassion. I also highlight different musical artists along the way. This year I've had Jill Matson on the show. I've had Grammy nominee Stephen Halpern, also 8-time Grammy nominee Peter Cater on the show. The end of last year, Claire Hedin, and so lots of incredible guests. If you missed those shows, I do encourage you, go back and check them out in the archives, which you can do on our show page. You can also do that through my website at Jessie Ann Nichols George 1, that's the number 1.com. That's also at the bottom of our show description, so that's a good area for you to do that. In my own personal work, I focus on helping people find and use compassion in their everyday lives. I've created the Genesis Clearing Statement, which some of you have experienced on previous shows. And if you've missed that, you can certainly catch it in our archives. There was a great show there with Kevin Baird when I started about a year ago here on the network. And you can go back and catch that archives where we actually go through what the Genesis Clearing Statement is all about. I've authored 2 books titled Activating Compassion and also Activating Compassion, the workbook. I've got 2 more books that are actually finished. They're just working their way through the publishing process, which are based on relationships. And then I've also created the Compassion Tour, which is a multi-state nationwide tour, including workshops, retreats, seminars, book signings, and fundraising events. And I'm working on setting some things up in 2014. I've already got a live in-studio TV interview going on in the Santa Barbara area the first week of March. So you can watch for that. They actually do allow people in while we're doing the taping on that, so if that's something you're interested in catching. And I will have some other events going on there in the Santa Barbara and Central California coast region there as well, including book signings and things. So watch for those events. You can follow those events at jessieannnicholsgeorge.eventbrite.com. There's also an option there called Gifting the Tour. So if you're unable to make the events and you still want to support the work that I'm doing and help me get out to the fundraisers, you can certainly choose that Gifting the Tour option and just gift in any amount that you like. Just a reminder, if you enjoy the show tonight, make certain that you tell your friends, family, and significant others, as well as all those wonderful that was a tongue twister there, all those social media Facebook connections and other social media connections that you've got out there. Oftentimes I find that when we have something like this, that they also like to learn about these things, and you never know who's out there that needs this exact show and this exact piece of information that's here. And they can just use the same link, by the way, that you use to come into the show, and then they'll just go ahead and listen to that in the archives at their convenience. I also mentioned you can get that on my webpage. Now, before we get started, as those of you who have listened to the show before are familiar with, you know that I like to delve into the 72 Names of God, Technology for the Soul, which is by Yehuda Berg. And I absolutely love this book because Yehuda works in a very simple, wonderful way, much the way I like to do my work, which is take large concepts and bring them into everyday life. And what I do is I randomly open up here, and there's always a great message and some insight here from Yehuda. So let's see what it is for tonight. And tonight, the name of God that we're working with, and by the way, this information will go right up on my website on my Jessie Ann Nichols page in the Main Street Universe tab on my website. And there you can go back and refer and see the names and the messages and everything from week to week if you'd like to go back and check those out. And the name we've got tonight is Fear of God, which is kind of an interesting one to have. So let's take a look, because I think this is really going to apply to our guest tonight. Fear of God does not refer to the religious notion of a creator who punishes and rewards. The light of the creator is thoroughly positive force, an endless spiritual energy whose only attributes are infinite sharing and love. And as he goes on to provide his insight on this, he says, fear of God refers to an inner understanding of how our universe is wired. Mistreating another person, for example, is like sticking our finger into a light socket. It's a cause that brings about a definite and painful effect. But it's not the electrical energy that needs to be feared. It's the act that brings us into dangerous contact with it. Fear of God means seeing the future consequences of our present actions. For instance, if we could foresee the negative consequences attached to disrespectful behavior, our long-term vision would cause us to refrain. Our decision would not be motivated by morality or religious fear. It would be based on something far more persuasive, our own self-interest. That power of acute observation comes to us through this name. And the meditation that he provides that goes with this insight is awareness of the divine spark in every person is awakened in your heart. You become wiser in the ways of the world. You perceive the repercussions attached to your every word and deed. And you know that sharing acts toward others are always in your own best interest. So that's really interesting. This is really going to apply to the work that our guest does in here, because I know a couple of the points right in here is right in his book. So the name of God here, the fear of God, is actually pronounced Daled Membet. Okay, that's Daled Membet. And that's our message from Yehuda for tonight. So again, you can find that on my website, Jessie Ann Nichols George 1, that's the number 1.com. And you can go back and read that at any time during the week. I usually get that up right after the show so that it's available for you right away. Now, a little bit of thought here before we go into our guest tonight. We talk about having true health in our lives or being truly healthy, although for many, they focus on only the physical realm when talking about health. However, is true health about so much more than that? What does true health really encompass? Now, it seems to me that true health is really far more encompassing than simply taking care of the physical body. When we really delve into it, it is about honoring and caring for our entire being. When one can become true health, they are finding an aspect known as heaven on earth. While we may or may not hold on to that strongly in our personal lives, we will oftentimes be able to see at least glimpses of this heaven that comes from living in true health. So the question then becomes, what does this encompass? Like with many things on our path, it means taking full and true responsibility for one's own health. If each person was to do this, I have no question that we would certainly strongly raise the vibration of this planet. There are many concepts that come under this concept, and each one could possibly have, just a whole show or topic all of its own there. And in bringing this large topic together, I would say it's about honoring balance in our lives and setting priorities which will ultimately connect us with spirit or divine presence. And this can include developing a preference for meditation over watching TV, making certain that we are getting physical movement instead of just sitting mindlessly in drone-like activities, preferring to fill the body with life-giving foods instead of chemically polluted food. It is about developing a focused and clear mind instead of being scattered in distractions. The list could really keep going. However, this kind of gives you an idea what we're talking about here. Now, Dr. Glen Hepker addresses living in several truths in order to create true health in our lives. And he has delved deeply into the philosophy of what creates true health for us. And these philosophies I see as being the truths of life. I see this as the same truths that seem to run through all major belief systems. It includes such things as realizing our oneness, doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, using appreciation, and more. Now, true health seems to be quite all-encompassing to every aspect of our being, and it seems to be a guideline for being aware of how much we are living in the truth of spirit. When looking at these concepts in their fullest, it seems that even many that feel that they are quite aligned with spirit will see that they have quite a ways to go. Now, when I think of living your truth, I see that it really is how we are living in the aspects of these universal truths, such as Dr. Glen Hepker has outlined in his work. And too many times we think we are connected with spirit or divine presence. But as we remove the ego, we are likely to find we are not living and being as much in our truth as we would like to believe. Have you looked at where you are and not, have you looked like and taken kind of that checkpoint recently where you're living or not living in your true health? And, even more so, where are you being your true health? Are you willing to truly take responsibility for your own health and well-being and continue to grow and develop on that? And are you willing to put in the effort to not only create your own true health, but to be an example and assist others in achieving it for themselves as well? So when we look at all this concept of true health and what our guest is going to be discussing tonight, this brings in a component of compassion that is related to the aspects of my books titled Gimme, Gimme, Gimme. And this reminds us that in helping others, we receive so much more than when we are only concerned with our own receiving. So in helping others achieve their true health, we can also receive our own. There are rewards so much greater to be received, and yet these rewards are not only filling our earthly needs, but also nourishing our spiritual well-being. I'm going to take a short break, and when we return, I will have Dr. Glen Hepker with us. He's going to be sharing his work with A Glimpse of Heaven, and the song I've got for you during our break is called Waves. It's by Claire Hedin. Again, she was our guest a year ago, well, a little less than a year ago, the last show of 2012. You can go back and check that out if you'd like. And you can also check out more of her work at clairehedin.com, which is www.clairehedin.com. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Crashing down on me.
And welcome back. You are listening to Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. My name is Jessie Ann Nichols George, and I am your hostess this evening. You were just listening to a song called Waves, which is by Claire Hedin, a former guest of ours. You can always go back and listen to the archive show with her if you'd like. It was the last show of 2012, and you can also check out more of her work at www.clairehedin.com. And that is CLAREHEDIN.com. And I would like to go ahead and bring on my guest tonight, get his mic opened up. We have with us Dr. Glen Hepker. He is the author of A Glimpse of Heaven, The Philosophy of Truth. It's based on the bright, beautiful school of thought, and his work focuses on taking true responsibility for our health and well-being. He holds a doctorate degree in psychology and health wellness arts. He's the owner of Mason City Wellness Center, LLC, and Mason City Tai Chi Kung Fu, LLC. Is an individual marital counselor. I'm having problems talking tonight here. He's an individual and marital counselor, wellness coach, master instructor of Tai Chi Chuan and Qi Kung Fu. I think I kind of went through some of that already. I'm overlapping here. Health wellness arts, including acupuncture, acupressure, nutrition, herbal arts, Tui Na, refined meditation, diaphragmatic breathing, stretching arts. And we're focusing tonight on his work of realizing deeper and deeper insight into this health and wellness philosophy and how to put it into practical application on a day-to-day basis. And you can learn more about his work at his links there at the bottom of the show description, which is A Glimpse of Heaven, The Philosophy of Truth.wordpress.com and MasonCityTaiChi.com. And Glen, I would love to welcome you here and say it's absolutely wonderful to have you on the show tonight.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Jessie. It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's it's funny because Glen kind of has been there with me for a very long time. He's been there from when I first started doing social media for my work. And I just remember Glen was this person who he'd keep popping into my posts that I was posting on LinkedIn, and he'd have all these responses that he kept putting in there, and I'm like, who is this person? And I've got to figure this person out. I've got to learn a little bit more about them and their work, and it's interesting. It's one of those things. You're one of those relationships that you really feel over social media. And I know when I was traveling last year that you really opened up your region, what you could to me, and it didn't quite work out for me to be in your specific region, but I just really appreciate all that openness that you displayed.
Well, I feel the same way, very much so, and it's really been an honor to get to know you as well as we can without actually being face-to-face. It's really, I've really been impressed with your insights and your efforts, and you truly, and I don't say this lightly, you definitely, in my eyes, make the world a better place on multiple levels, Jessie. So it's really it's a privilege to be here.
Well, I truly appreciate that. And what I'd love to do, Glen, is to have you start off by sharing some of your story with us and how you got into all of this work you're doing, because you've had a pretty interesting journey along the way, and I know that other people would like to get to know more about you and how you got to where you're at.
Well, when I was about 17, living in Southern California, my parents had a habit of eating at a certain Chinese restaurant. One of a couple that would become my master instructors in the traditional Chinese health arts and also in the Tai Chi, Chuan, Qigong, Kung Fu, and the whole caboodle, basically. And my parents told them that I was doing karate at the time, and he got to know me a little bit, and he was ethnic Chinese, born in China, and he had escaped during the Chinese Revolution in the 1940s to Taiwan, and then he moved with his niece, Su Li, to Southern California, and he had a academy, very formal academy that he invited me to. And so for about 10 years, while I was also going to college at the time, I became a student, and or I finished high school and went to school, and also to his academy, and that's how that kind of came about. And they were not difficult or hard, although it'll sound a little bit harsh, but they had a habit of saying it's kind of very strict but yet loving, and that if you said you were going to be there and they kind of knew your schedule, you definitely should be there, and that was kind of learning about honor and doing the right thing for the right sake type thing with regard to their view, which is just being that way was part of the training unto itself. And I don't mean to delve too much into that, but anyway, for those years I trained many hours per day, probably 2 or 3, 4 times a week, depending on the scheduling, and for, like I said, about 9 or 10 years. And it also, not just the physical arts, but it included the traditional Chinese health arts. And it was a very old-fashioned way of doing things, which is a really good thing in this case, because they expected a lot, but yet they were very benevolent and loving and altruistic throughout the whole thing. And my main instructor didn't speak perfect English, but he did pretty well. And my second instructor, his niece, Sue Lee, she spoke impeccable English, so that helped. And so with acupuncture and acupressure and herbs, nutrition, and a huge philosophy as set forth in my book. It's a combination or an amalgamation of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, but it's meant in what's coined as the Shaolin tradition to some degree. It's loosely and also succinctly, that may not make perfect sense, but it's within a certain family art that was handed down to my instructors through their family. And anyway, it's a very defined and evolved philosophy, and it's just so broad that it's hard to put it all into words in a nutshell. But it's meant to be very benevolent and, like I said, altruistic and very kind and compassionate, and teaching mindfulness and the importance of learning to control one's or learning how to realize a truly healthful way of life, both in the dietary sense and the physical arts. Basically, in the physical arts, you're learning to do with your human body what your human body was meant to do with regard to mobility and exercise. But just as importantly, last but not least, learning to control and find a healthful way of life with regard to dealing with stress and anxiety. And that's a huge part of it also with regard to meditation and splendid skill that develops with regard to mindfulness. And keep in mind that this is an ages-old art. It goes back 1,500 years. So it's really highly evolved, and it's not to brag, but it really just is what it is. And so but like I said, it's based on Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, but it's not so much as a religion, even though in many cases, most cases, those have developed into a religion, and it's related to what we call, or it's the specific art that I learned and teach, coach, and endeavor humbly to practice is called Ming Chia, which means the bright, beautiful school of thought, and it's a type of Tao Chan, which is also related to what most people have heard as Zen, which is a Japanese offshoot that came later off of Tao Chan. And Tao Chan was originally meant to be more, like I said, a philosophical way of life. There's nothing wrong with religion. That's not the point. It's just that there's no legalistic tendencies other than the basic do's and don'ts of right action and right life. Obviously, we try to be honest and try to treat other people with respect and dignity, decency, goodness, and grace, and that sort of thing. But anyway, I'm kind of jumping around. But the point is that there's some central features of that so-coined bright school of thought, or bright, beautiful school of thought. And the first, and please feel free to ask questions, but the first central feature, there's many features, but there's 3 or 4 central features, is the true responsibility of healthful interaction, which in the thesis is, the short version is that we would learn that no matter what, which sounds harsh, but we would figure out how, no matter what, to treat others with dignity and decency and goodness and grace, and figure out how to truly mean it no matter what. And in doing so, for instance, it would be important to kind of explain the theory that kind of is behind that. Is it as simple as it sounds? You know, we all have had traumatic or difficult experiences from the time we were born. Not that it was all bad or all good. It was just, but we have experienced things. And in traditional Chinese health arts, emotional blockages, and I hear you talk a lot about this in your work, and I really respect that, because, in fact, you have a splendid way of going about it, even in some ways, I would say, more so than what I do, and it's really touching when I hear you speak, or in your writing, or on your posts. But the point is that we get emotional blockages through those traumatic experiences or difficult things that have happened in our life that can create blockages of the free flow of what we coin qi in Chinese. In Indian Sanskrit, it's pranha, and so on. And in Japanese or Nipponese, it's ki. And anyway, the free flow of bioelectric energy in one's body. It's not that all illnesses can be rooted in that, but many are, according to the theory. And so through learning to be emotionally secure and safe in our everyday life, through taking responsibility for our own true health, we can learn to slowly ease these blockages, which become, if they're there long enough, can become illnesses. And what we say in traditional Chinese health arts, or traditional Chinese medicine, is that these blockages, where the qi goes, or the bioelectric energy goes, so goes the blood, and often the lymphatic system, or the fluid in our lymph system. And so we have different acupoints or major gates, for instance, that can be unblocked, whether it's with acupuncture or herbs or nutrition or a combination of all the above, because of a healthful way of life that we can develop, and that sort of thing. And then there's Qigong is a huge part of that, learning meditation and diaphragmatic breathing. Most people breathe more at the chest versus the diaphragm. Most people have really tight diaphragms from stress and anxiety. When healthful infants are born, it's more in the old-fashioned sense called belly breathing, but and most often through life, as an infant is born and goes through life, they stop breathing at the diaphragm. And in all my arts that I teach, there's nothing more helpful than someone relearning how to breathe at the diaphragm. and
I think that's really important in there, Glenn, because sure. I notice myself sometimes, if I, for whatever reason, maybe there's a bunch of smoke in the air or something in fire season or whatever it is, that
sure.
If I stop and I refocus on breathing from the diaphragm, I can get a better air supply than I do when I just let that other program breathing take
sure.
over, or try to breathe from the chest region. It's almost like if you try to breathe from the chest region, your breathing feels tighter and shallower. Whereas,
absolutely, and it's actually empirically proven that diaphragmatic or abdominal breathing greatly enhances circulation, especially in the extremities, and makes us more relaxed. But no, go ahead. I'm not surprised at all that you know a lot of that you are working on this.
Well, I do find it's important, and I do use it a lot, like when I teach courses online and things like that, and I'm doing the meditations. I let people know, you can choose your breath work, but just make sure you're breathing from the diaphragm when you're doing it.
Exactly.
I was going to back just a little bit here. Did I hear you correctly? Did you say that where the blockages are is where the energy moves towards? Or did I hear that wrong?
Well, in acupuncture theory, there are 3 cycles per day with regard to all the bioelectric energy along all the meridians or pathways or and that sort of thing. And if a blockage occurs through whatever reason, if I get a Charlie horse on my leg, that's a blockage, and that's an acute blockage. We would call that a hot or deficient yin blockage, which would mean that it's acute and kind of but it blocks the free flow of bioelectric energy and blood in that area, and also sometimes lymph. And so, now think of the Charlie horse as like an emotional blockage. Instead of a Charlie horse, it's like an emotional blockage, but it's still kind of like a Charlie horse in a sense. So, and usually those type of blockages, emotional blockages, are in the front or the sides of our torso, and those are called in our arts, those are called mu points usually, or there's major gates. In Indian Sanskrit, they're called chakras, and most often emotional blockages, they may act kind of like an acute injury in a sense, but if they stay long enough, they become kind of like a cold blockage or a chronic blockage, whether it's because of an injury or an accident or even a virus or some kind of inflammation. And that's the whole idea behind that theory. And if an acute blockage becomes chronic or cold, like that would be deficient yang, then, for instance, if that stays long enough and nothing changes, that can become morbid or more and more morbid. And in our arts, not always, but like leukemia and stuff like that are a little bit different, but still somewhat similar. But most types of cancer, for instance, are chronic blockages in the free flow of bioelectric energy, blood, and sometimes lymph that get blocked. And over time, the immune system or our immune systems can't fight that any longer. And according to and this is all in lay terms, but when that happens, then where there's bacterial matter and viral matter and even fungi and different types of microbes get caught there, they become more and more stagnant. And so, not to go on in this point, but the point is that's the basic theory. And to a large degree, that's been actually, not completely, but proven in congruence and also just by happenstance in westernized medicine, as far as the theory about how cancer and illness, it doesn't have to just be in your tissue, in your skin, or in your muscles. It can be an internal organ, for instance, and often that can be related to having poor circulation and a poor diet, for instance, or lack of mobility and exercise, and also not learning to deal with stress in a truly helpful, or anxiety in a truly helpful way. Stress and anxiety into themselves are like almost, in some ways, it can be the worst thing that causes blockages, because once again, it can go to more terrible experiences that we've had as a child or sometime during our life, or it can just be overall stress that we all have in our lives, and it's just kind of a vicious circle. And
but it really is a vicious circle that can be in there. And what's really interesting when we look at the stress levels and the stress factors right now is so many of these things are triggered from programming earlier in our life and, pattern in, and then they resurface later. And we're actually in a period now with this new moon that just passed this week, being able to reset and reprogram right now for long-term karmic results, which I'm finding very interesting when we look at that in the concept of true health, that we can actually reset all of our patterns now and choose those new patterns. The body and the planetary alignments are such that it will actually activate into the new pattern.
Sure. And there are so many dynamics going on, and even to humbly compliment what you just said. Now, some of what I'm about to say I always say this, whether it's necessary or not, but some of it can sound a little bit out in left field. But in ancient Taoist texts, and to some degree ancient Greek philosophy, and definitely ancient Indian Sanskrit theory and philosophy, I mean way back 2,500 years or more, but especially the Taoists, slightly more. But remember, a lot of the Taoist Chinese philosophy was rooted in the Indian Sanskrit philosophy. Both of those cultures are the two oldest ongoing living cultures on Earth, so they've had a lot of time to figure a lot of stuff out. Anyway, not perfect, but modern Western, and not just Western, but scientists are studying the ancient Taoists, especially the Taoists, to some degree the Greek and Indian Sanskrit philosophies and theories with regard to what you just touched on. And remember, that's what a lot of the philosophy and theories of my art are rooted in. And they actually had in their theories touched on what was called light matter, dark energy, and antimatter. And in our arts, as it's handed down, that I was actually taught, not just from studying these ancient texts, although those were to a large degree available to me, is when, with regard to the cosmos that you just so eloquently noted, that in our arts, as we see it, now not everyone would agree with this, and it sounds almost a bit out in left field, like I said, but in our arts, the dark energy and the dark energy is in living things, it's the bioelectric energy, the microscopic current in our bodies. The dark matter is like a spiritual. There's the heavens, which are the cosmos as far as what we can look at through a telescope, and everything that's micro and macro. Those things are what we would say is as far as the electrical current in inanimate objects or living things, that's bioelectric energy or chi. And the dark matter is heaven. If there's a spiritual existence, we have a common saying, it's in my words, but I didn't come up with it. But if there is a heaven, if there is a key to the universe, if there is a sixth sense, they're rooted in true honesty, promoting of true happiness and true freedom, but most importantly, nothing to hide behind. An existence, so to speak, where there's nothing to hide behind. All is known. Well, and my instructors, they loved Albert Einstein. They thought he was one of the coolest individuals that ever lived, and his theory of relativity and all that sort of thing, and his philosophy. He embraced their philosophy. A lot of his philosophy and his studies were rooted in these related arts, not the exact art, of which there's thousands, but anyway, the point is that if his E equal MC square was that if there was if at the speed of light, there's no time, no space, no distance, nothing to hide behind. Well, in the philosophy that I learned, there's a similar concept that's actually translated fairly similarly, and if heaven was a place where there's no time, no space, no distance, then at the speed of light, no time, no space, no distance, then there's nothing to hide behind. All is known. so the idea that I'll stop going in that direction, but just to make the point is that if we are affected by the cosmos, and there's very, very many in all cultures, many outlooks on this, but the theory is that the bioelectric energy, or the energy, the electrical current within the universe, at the at atomic and molecular level, which we all have within us, we're made up of molecules and atoms and lots of other stuff that, but all those things are rooted in molecules, and all those molecules have electricity. And so when we have a blockage in our body that's like an illness or an acute new illness or temporary illness or even a chronic illness, then that's matter. Within the matter is electricity, microelectricity, low current, and antimatter even comes into it slightly. And this is not as exact within the theory, but if I have cancer, or if I have this illness or this blockage that stays long enough and it becomes morbid enough, and decays, and my body can't fight that anymore, my immune system, then the idea is that you become the antimatter is like matter that's inside out. And so, but if those two ever connect, oh boy, bad things happen, end of the world, if they connect in a big enough way. Well, within us, what is death? It's perceived to be the end of the world. If we have an illness that would actually cause our death, or even a severe illness, until our last breath, there's some chance that we can heal. But hence, that's one of the roots of why, or the foundations of true health, why it's so important to learn to develop, becoming more and more skilled, but greater and greater mastery, and embracing that the notion that there's always room for improvement, and we can always get better, more skilled. That is true mastery. There's no such thing as a master that doesn't have to try anymore. There's always, in our arts, there's always room for improvement. So as we become more skilled in developing a healthful way of life, a truly healthful way of life with regard to our nutrition, our dealing with stress and anxiety, and exercise and mobility, these blockages become less and less likely. Lightning bolts can still strike. I mean, we can literally be hit by a lightning bolt. Well, and that would cause a lot of problems potentially. But I'm just saying that illness, we're not helpless. In other words, we can try. That's the main point. And I'm kind of jumping around. I have a tendency to do that, but that's but the most one of the other central features of the philosophy, in the most loving, benevolent, and compassionate way, is just trying to realize that how we cannot have a need to be addicted to fear of healthful change, and not, or needing less and less and less and less to infinity things to hide behind. In other words, fooling ourselves and being dishonest with ourselves or others. I mean, none of us, we're all in the same boat in this. And that's one of the central features of this, and that's so important, is the notion that we're all so much more in the same boat in everything than we often think and act. And so when I say these things, I'm no better in my eyes, and this is not to put myself down, than a drunk laying in the gutter in the street. We are all capable of doing really good stuff, making the world a better place, and embracing the notion that the true gauge of true health is, are my actions, my thoughts, making this world a better place, and endeavoring to do the right thing for the right sake without the need for selfish recognition. Just doing those things helps and blockages in our bodies, in our spirits, and even in our minds through that true effort. And that's one of the things you often speak of, is the effort and showing compassion, not compassion just for others, but for ourselves. and really taking the proverbial bull by the horns and really trying. And that's a gift. When something bad happens, we can either decide whether that's, we can see that as a blessing and a truly helpful thing, or we can be all upset and bent out of shape and let it ruin not just our day, maybe our year, or maybe even our life. And in my arts, I teach what's coined as, clearly what most people think of as self-defense arts. But in these arts, true self-defense is self-defense against our own weaknesses and bad habits. If I'm confronted by it, and this is not to get into this type of stuff, but if I'm walking down the street in a big city and somebody wants to mug me or take my money, if I panic or if I can't think clearly versus being mindful, the mugger often knows that most people aren't used to being confronted like that. They're depending on you sucking your breath in and holding your breath and panicking and adrenal stress. And that's really hard. And none of us know how we would react in that situation. In fact, if it happens 10 times, we may react 10 different ways. Hopefully not. But I'm just saying we can be responsible for our own selves, and that's the point. It's such an important point along with those other central features. And another really central feature is the true responsibility of supporting others, and I stress healthful goals. And all these central features are wonderfully intertwined, and their purpose. There's a purpose behind that, and it's planned, and that all the other aspects, doing the right thing for the right sake, treating others with, even in our worst of moods, with dignity and decency and goodness and grace, and acting without acting, and the same boat theory that we're all, and then supporting others, and it goes way beyond that. But without those central features. And being mindful, endeavoring to be mindful about these things. These are even things to meditate on or just look within and see. I teach meditation, and it's a highly refined type of meditation. And we learn to look within, hopefully with less and less fear. For instance, if I were to say, and I do this with my students, and they look at me like I'm half crazy once they really think about it. And maybe I am crazy, but the point is that what if you would sit on your couch, for instance? Most people can't sit in some kind of a lotus position, but what if you just sat on your couch where the TV is or whatever and not have anything on? No chance of distractions, no noise, nothing's perfect, but just sit there for an hour. Just literally sit there for an hour, don't move, don't fall asleep, and think. And then go past just thinking, but not thinking, learning to helpfully empty the mind, confront one's demons. It's tough stuff. Have I perfected after so many decades? Of course not. There's always room for improvement, and that's a wonderful blessing. I hope I'm making sense, Jesse.
It is. It's very true, and it's one of those things that I think people can miss sometimes. I think more people have forgotten what it's like to be able to still or quiet or shift that train of thought to that blank or mindful state. And I was glad that you were bringing up the aspects of doing the right thing for the right sake. It's one of those things that I think is, it used to be a given many years ago, say in my parents' generation,
Sure.
and I was kind of raised under that belief system with them, and of course they were raised under this aspect of you're no better and you're no worse than anybody else.
Right.
But when I look at that concept, it's one of the things that really hits me with today's society and culture and the kids that are coming up, that there's such an immediate gratification that comes through some of these generations, that there's no concern about doing the right thing for the right sake. It's like, well, if I make this complaint, I can just get this for free. Versus the right thing is that these people get paid for their work, because if they're not paid, they're not going to be there.
Right.
these aspects that when we're not doing the right thing for the right sake, that people actually, we lose having these things available to us. And so really bringing in that decency, and I was glad that you were bringing those factors in, because that was one of the things that I was going to have you get into, which was, how we can gauge our true health, which, of course, you've got those 4 points: dignity, decency, goodness, and grace.
And grace can be religious grace or just philosophical type grace. I mean, so go ahead, but that,
So I think that's all those things that people. The interesting thing when we tie this all into doing the right thing for the right sake, what's interesting about that is it's not just about being decent to another person, but we lose our own self-dignity if we're not doing that.
Oh, exactly.
And once we lose that, we're starting to, we see the things that we start to see around society of when we've lost our dignity, we lose our self-confidence. We start losing the self-worth. Not just the dignity, but the self-worth and the confidence level.
Very well said, Jesse. That's exactly that's exactly it.
And then that seems to really open to a whole nother realm, which we're seeing in these aspects of these passive-aggressive behaviors, these controlling patterns. I see it filter into so many areas when we look at that. So if we're looking at those things, basically then are you saying that if we have those 4 things in our life, or how much we're into those 4 things, can kind of give us a gauge as to how much we're living in true health?
Right, and there's the 4 with regard to the notion in these arts, in my arts, of the true responsibility of healthful interaction. We have dignity, decency, goodness, and grace, and figuring out how to truly mean it. In other words, not faking it, but at least as a goal, and just figuring out how to mean it mindfully, even through meditation, and truly mean it no matter what. And then there's the notion of what's called wu wei, or acting without acting, endeavoring to do the right thing for the right sake without the need for selfish recognition or hidden agendas. That's a really tough one, because it's really easy to fool oneself and then realizing we're all much more in the same boat than we often think and act, and then the true responsibility of healthful interaction. And what you're speaking to with regard to, in just a moment ago, relates in our arts, and we could coin it 1,000 different things, but in my arts it's called the wall of lies. In other words, the more dishonest we are with ourselves and others, and the more or less in a healthful spirit of dignity and decency and so on, and the less that we act without acting. In other words, endeavoring to do the right thing for the right unselfish sake, and treat people like we're all in the same boat, and support others in their healthful goals. The more dishonest we are, or the less healthful we are in our attitudes, which is really tough, because life's stressful, but the less we do that, the more we create this more and more solid wall of lies that, if we're not careful, or maybe even not even aware of it, but if we are aware of it, and even most major religions address this in wonderful ways in their central features also. So it's not like it's a new concept. We can coin it or name it or verbalize it in many different ways, but the point is it's still the same thing. And if that wall of lies becomes too thick, it becomes more and more difficult to, it's so important to realize that we need, what's so helpful is endeavoring to at least better and better realize in our daily lives and put it into practice that these features, and try to learn to live life as a living, loving art form versus the opposite, or there's some variation or some dynamic of being less and less so versus more and more so. And because if we're not careful, we can get stuck on what I like to coin as, not to sound harsh, but stagnant plateaus that can become like a living death. And and that can lead to death, literally, if we have enough of these unhealthful blockages that are, we could say they're spiritual blockages, they're also physical blockages, they're emotional or mental blockages, the less honest we are. And to some, at first, a lot of these things can sound, and people I've interacted with can seem like kind of a pipe dream or just totally quaint and unrealistic and almost, if not silly. I've never been treated in a really bad way with regard to that, but I'm just saying. But I try to ask how, what, and why questions, especially in wellness coaching and counseling, whether it's marital counseling or individual counseling or just with students of the art. I try to ask them questions so that they, so that I'm doing. We have another old saying: is there's no such thing as a teacher. I can instruct, I can direct, but I can't teach anybody anything. Each one of us are our own teachers, best teachers. So if that's true, and a good teacher learns more than the student, which really gets complicated, but the idea is that if I can ask how and what and why questions and that don't allow just a yes or no answer, that's the classic Jungian concept. But guess where he got that? He readily reported that he was one of the great psychologists, that he got those concepts from studying the Eastern arts, not my specific art, but related similar arts or philosophies or theories, and that being that they don't allow just yes or no questions, they allow the person to verbalize and me to reflect back to them so they can both hear themselves speak and me reflect back to them what they said and maybe respectfully help assist them in prompting greater insight. It's a wonderful thing. A lot of times when people see those in movies or reading, they see those vague Zen sayings that don't seem to make any sense. Well, that's the whole point, is that they're profound and they're deeper meaning, but they're not just handing the key to the universe to people. If there even is a key to the universe, they're definitely, they want people to work at it. Now, similar to the notion of the how, why, and what questions. And so that helps people teach themselves. And that's a huge part of what I do. For instance, I endeavor to do. Man, it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice, and that's not a complaint. It's a blessing. But I learn stuff almost every day when I do that. Not anything totally new, but deeper. And what a wonderful blessing. And but yet I can't do all. I don't want to do all counseling. I don't want to do all wellness coaching. I also want to do the physical arts that we do, so that I can also stay healthy in the physical sense and every other sense. But it's really an important concept: the how, why, and what questions that do not allow for, at least unless people are really being difficult, but that's unusual, that they have to respond, or if they're really trying, that they will respond and hear themselves speak, and I can reflect that back upon them. I hope that makes sense.
It does, and it's very interesting when you talk about sharing that information there, and really people do. They feel like there is that key to just be handed to them, and the part that gets missed so many times, I think, is the key is that you have to go through the discovery process to learn it for yourself.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly.
Not actually something that somebody can just hand you where you don't do anything for it. And it leads me around because you have two really big concepts in your book that really tie into your title, A Glimpse of Heaven. And those two aspects that I think for me anyways, they kind of go hand in hand, and that is in Chapter 11 where you talk about true faith and the three portents, where we need to be devoid of hate, greed, and ignorance, and then that true happiness comes, you said there's three marks of being, and you get into talking about the world is full of change, suffering is rooted in resistance, and separation, and then you also talk a little bit about an eightfold healthful path. So I'll let you kind of delve into those from there.
Sure. Well, with regard to the first thing you mentioned was the notion of a glimpse of heaven. A glimpse of heaven, I'll pretend for a moment I'm teaching meditation. A glimpse of heaven is, we actually literally, humbly and lovingly and respectfully mean that, once again, quite literally. Of course, everybody, it takes a lot of effort, lots of time. In fact, that's what some of the names of Tai Chi Chuan and Kung Fu and Qigong actually literally mean, taking time and effort to gain greater and greater mastery. Well, there's nothing much more difficult than this. There are lots of difficult things, but anyway, the glimpse of heaven notion succinctly means, first of all, one can't do this very well, and it can take decades, if not a lifetime, to even begin to get good at this stuff. And that's really, and you address that too, that people are more and more, especially younger people, wanting more immediate gratification. So anyway, this is very difficult, but learn the 24 hours a day, all of the time, diaphragmatic breathing, and according to Indian Sanskrit teachings and Taoist and Buddhist teachings, there's a furnace in acupuncture theory or acupuncture-related theories just behind the navel and also just below the navel. There's like a furnace of bioelectric energy, and the notion of the diaphragmatic breathing stoking that furnace like a one of those devices that stoke the fireplaces anyway, but almost like that. It's and stronger and stronger and stronger to where you can learn to feel the bioelectric energy. I know that can sound like out in left field, but how do we know unless we try? It's so foreign, not totally, but it's pretty foreign to our culture, our Western culture. But in my teachings, there's almost nothing more important. But without the diaphragmatic breathing and learning to do it 24 hours a day, all the time, without raising your shoulders and that sort of thing. So there's the diaphragmatic breathing, there's the feeling, and then learning to empty your mind, either literally, which has actually been proven scientifically that can be done, but it takes years and years and years to become skilled, and learning to play the unblemished witness to your internal and external environments. In other words, unblemished witness means without expectations, preset patterns of thinking, and learning to just witness in a loving, benevolent, altruistic, selfless way. And that those three parts in combination, as one becomes more and more skilled, are like what we coin as a glimpse of heaven. A glimpse without craving, desire, or fear of healthful change of an existence, so to speak, where there's no time, no space, no distance, nothing to hide behind. And just learning to do that according to this philosophy and theory creates less fear in one's life. Fear less. What's the ultimate fear for most people is death. Well, we're not saying we would ever look in any way, shape, or form. I swear on my grandmother, who's most important to me in many ways, on her goodness, and that I'm not saying that we would ever promote an embracement of death. But if there's less fear and that sort of thing, then it's very helpful if we can see what it's like on the other side. And I don't even like to use terminology like that because it sets precedence for how, because everybody views those things for different things in different ways. But if we can learn to witness that in a more unblemished way, then we can also literally quite literally learn to feel a certain feeling. And this is where I'm leaning to with regard to your notion, your concept of a glimpse of heaven. It also relates to true happiness, what we coin as true happiness and true honesty and so on, is that feeling. We've all had, or most of us, I found not everybody, have these spontaneously during your lifetimes, and really special, loving, sentimental moments, whether it's watching a movie or hearing our favorite song, kind of a spine-tingling, sparkling, loving feeling. Well, in our arts, that is what we're trying to strengthen so that we have that all of the time, but only through unblemished witnessing and diaphragmatic breathing. And there are processes that you can go through that we have in our training that people can learn to breathe at the abdomen. Most people within a couple months, if they really make the effort. But anyway, the point is, all of what I'm addressing relates to that, even the 3 marks of being. That's a Buddhist concept. That's one of the 3 main Buddhist concepts. There's the 3 marks of being, the Four Noble Truths, and what we coin as the Eightfold Healthful Path, and so on. And people don't even have to understand all that, although it can't hurt. But most religions even teach similar things as far as those other central features. And so the idea that more that we can meditate and be breathing properly and stoking that furnace, that combination is what we coin as a glimpse of heaven. And in our arts, there's nothing more helpful. It's not a competition. This is nothing. I never try to push or evangelize or sell anything. At least if I do, I hope I never do. But I'm just, when we discuss in this discussion, I'm trying to educate according to this philosophy that's at the root of what I was taught and what I teach to those that are asked to be taught. And so the idea is that there's nothing more helpful. There's other things that are very helpful, but the difficult thing about it is for many people, if not most, it can take years of real effort. And you mentioned the true faith. What's the precursor, or what is necessary in making that true effort? It's true faith in something that's bigger than ourselves. That's spiritualism right there. If you look in the dictionary, I'm using my own words, but it's the same meaning as if you look in the dictionary. Spiritual or spiritualism is believing in something that's bigger than ourselves, and having faith in something that cannot necessarily be proven. But guess what? If people make the effort, the true effort, and realize there's always room for improvement, then if they make the true effort, and if they really make the effort and aren't fooling themselves, they can have proof, not just of a glimpse of heaven, but just more and more quality health. And like I said, lightning bolts can still strike. We all have genetic weaknesses. In modern psychology and in modern medicine even, they've come up with concepts that are very similar to, believe it or not, the traditional Chinese health arts or Indian health arts, is the notion that what they coin as the diathesis stress model, is that we're all a combination of our genetics and what we do with our cells, our bodies, and then external factors, our environment. Once again, if a lightning bolt strikes or there's a flu virus going around, we can have a strong immune system, but we can't be guaranteed, for instance, that we're not going to catch the flu. If we do catch the flu, the healthier we are. Children and the elderly, especially elderly that are immunocompromised, can have more likelihood of bad health. A really more chronic or acute reaction to those stimuli, so nothing's perfect on this earth. In heaven, if heaven exists, and I'm just saying that humbly when I say if, but if it exists, then everything, there would be none of that. And a glimpse of heaven we literally mean. And so if people could do that, and more people do that, the central thesis of the True Health philosophy, the non-abbreviated version versus True Health or True Responsibility, is that the world would be a much better and different place as more and more people take true responsibility for their own health and well-being. And that means in the holistic sense, not just physical health, as you so well addressed initially. It's not that that's not important. It's really important. But they all complement, spiritual health, emotional, mental health, and that's what relates in my book to what we call the theory of lightness. There's the spiritual aspect, there's a physical aspect, and there's the mental, emotional aspect. They're really all the same thing. But for explanation's sake, they're not exactly the same thing, but they all are so intertwined, and that in a more than just connecting the dots, or connecting the helpful dots. They're very. It's an important concept. But once again, without those first central features, most central features, in other words, the true responsibility of healthful interaction and acting without acting, and the same boat theory, and supporting others in their healthful goals, all this other stuff is basically hogwash. And I don't mean to state that negatively, but without those things, then it's not likely that you can have the other. And it's not to sound harsh or difficult, but that's pretty commonsensical. So anyway, once again, I hope that's making sense.
It is, and what you were getting into and what is so interesting with what you were just talking about there is that it really explains how we can, as an individual, get these glimpses, live in the space of heaven, get these little aspects by working on ourselves, even when there's chaos around. But then the more people that step forward and work on themselves and find their pieces of heaven as well by evolving, eventually that's when we start to see the total consciousness raise into greater health. And that's when we start seeing our outer world reflecting more of what's happening for us personally.
Yep, that's exactly
in that. So I think that comes back to one of the things you touched on at the beginning, which was the macrocosm, microcosm concept. And this is, it ties some of your other aspects in together of, I can't do your health for you. You can't do my health for me. We each have to take care of ourselves. But if we each do that, then the sum is greater than the two individuals put together.
Very well said. That's exactly it. I have a friend that's my best male contemporary, meaning about my age friend, is a physician here locally. We do a lot of things together, and he refers some of his patients to me for various things. Great guy. And, and he wishes, that he could be not pushy, but more, I don't know what word to use, not forceful, but so much as somehow, first of all, they don't have a lot of time. We live in a semi-rural area, so there's only a limited amount of practitioners, but so it kind of becomes almost like a conveyor belt in a sense, and that's not, I'm meaning that against him, but it just is what it is. It is what it is, but I know lots of him and lots of other physicians that they say, we want to, if we see an opening, we do, but to help, to say, like with somebody with type 2 diabetes, not type 1, that's a little different, but type 2 diabetes, people can really pretty much negate the symptoms, as long as the symptoms haven't been around for a long time, where there's actual serious chronic damage to the internal organs and the different parts of the body. You can learn to negate that, and some of them try, and not always, but most often and I don't take it that there's some passion here. They really want to help, but a lot of people aren't willing to change their diet. They aren't willing to exercise more. And, and it's sad because once again, it goes back to that. And I mean this totally humbly. Remember, we're all in the same boat. We all have room for improvement. But the point is that some people, more to varying levels, we're all not doing the best we can. Okay, I'm a jogger. There's some days, I have, even after decades of jogging and doing all the other stuff that I do, multiple stuff, I can look at it like a chore. But sometimes I'm not proud of this, and it's usually not like that. But if it is, sometimes you just got to put your blinders on or look within yourself and just, as I'm not to quote Nike, but just do it, or however they say it. And there's so many dynamics in that. It's so complicated, and one size doesn't fit all. Everybody's a little different, but we're all still human beings. And the knowledge
that kind of
base
back to that wraps into that aspect of what they're doing. They refer to as putting the blinders on, but it's about being willing to accept the choices that somebody makes, even if that is to not have health.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
And so it's not much about being blind. It's about, I'm here, I'll support you in the process if you make the choices to be healthy, but if you choose not to be, then I simply accept that, but I'm not going to keep beating the door down on you,
Right. And some of it is the pressure that there's so many, there's a chronic shortage of nurses and physicians, and it's only getting worse. And that, I think a lot of the younger physicians are being taught a lot of the philosophy or similar stuff from what we're addressing, but it's really a difficult thing. And I'm not saying modern medicine is perfect either. I'm just saying that I do sense that the original passion in going into that line of work, even mine, I'm a trained acupuncturist, but I don't do acupuncture because I had to finally decide what I was going to do when I grew up, because there's so many things I'm trained in these arts. But the
hard to choose sometimes.
If I have a student that has a headache and they need, it's kind of a serious thing, I'll do some acupuncture, but I don't charge for it. It's just part of the benefit of being a student. And there's herbs, nutrition, lots of different things, and the Twina, which is a whole other thing, but it's related. But I mean, it's just I do find, and a lot of the acquaintances that and friends that, and you see this in our culture. You see it right on the television with the pharmaceutical commercials. And I'm not trying to sound blindly negative, but I mean, it seems like people are really looking for the magic pill that will make everything better. And I hope there's never is one. I really do. I hope there, and not that anybody that's in that situation would care what I think, but I just mean, and it's not to sound haughty or special, but it's just, I really see that the people are, and you hear other things advertised that are like on the radio and in TV, that mostly the radio, like on satellite radio and stuff like that, that basically, if you take this, it's almost like the old medicine show wagons that would go around in the 1800s, or whatever, where you hear of that. You see that in history books, and even in the 20th century, where people would be just wanting to believe that this drug or this concoction would make everything better, and there is no such thing. The real magic pill is in the effort and embracing, and the knowledge is out there. It doesn't have to come from me or anybody necessarily like that. I mean, through the one nice thing about the modern age is there's a plethora of information. Some of it does conflict, but most readily it does support much of what we're saying, you and I. So.
Well, and you talk about that aspect of things, of people looking for the magic pill, and of course there's multiple facets of that, from people who want to have control and those sorts of aspects, in combination with marketing to people who don't want to be responsible for themselves.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And exactly. To me, that comes back to some of our original aspects of dignity and decency and goodness and grace, because those people that are seeking out that control, that are trying to gain that control, are really tapping into people who are in a vulnerable and an innocent state in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
They haven't really awakened up, if you want to say that, to know differently. And there are people that know differently and still make choices, but you've got a lot of people out there that don't know differently. They're trusting that doctor, or they're trusting this ad on TV to be the truth. And so for them to come out and to take advantage of people who really don't know, really crosses, in my book, a lot of lines, so to say there.
What we coin is the three portents, what you mentioned earlier in my book, or it relates to it. Buddhism,
Greed.
Mahayana Buddhism is the hate, greed, and ignorance, the three portents of all bad tidings, and so that, exactly.
Now, I was going to touch on something here quick while we've still got a few minutes to work with, because I kind of want to wrap and bring some of these concepts all back together again with an aspect that you talk about. You talk about people might be wondering, well, what do I do with all of this? And out of everything, there's a lot of things that we don't control. It's about being in the flow, and it's about all these realizations that you've been talking about, taking responsibility, realizing that it's an ongoing process. It's not a destination, and then all of a sudden you sit there stagnant.
Right, exactly. That's one of the major points right there. But go ahead.
But you mentioned that there are two things that we can absolutely control. And you talk about these being how we interact with others and our level of objectivity and insight that we would employ with ourselves.
I mean, even if you were living under a dictatorship, you may not be able to say what you want to say, but you can think what you want to think. So that we can still control that, and I don't mean to bring up negative things like that, a political thing like that, but I mean the point is, yes, exactly, and that we do have that choice. Whether we exercise the choice or not, that's up to us. But I mean, even in major religions, that's pretty much taught, and free will. I mean, that's one of the things. I'm not a Christian, but my wife is a Christian, and I love her for her beliefs, and I have a great respect for it. One of the things that made Christianity, at least in many ways, not always, but in many ways, so successful was because of the respect of free will. And so, and I'm just trying to connect the dots. In other words, I'm not saying that we're the only ones, obviously, that think that way. But exactly, and that's exactly it. And being mindful, becoming more and more mindful. I mean, how many times do we drive down the same street? We live a certain spot, and we go to this place or we go to that place, and we travel down the street thousands of times, and we certainly often conveniently think, oh, we know that street so well, and we know this and we know there, and that's because we think we do, but we don't know. We may not know diddly about that street, or what's just the whole being mindful and really learning to witness what's there. It doesn't have to be a street; it could be anything. It can be looking within ourselves or outside of ourselves in our external environments, and the what happened in the way I've coined it and what I was taught too is that one reflects upon the other. Our internal environments are reflecting back and forth with our external environments, the greater world reflecting back within ourselves. And the idea is all the wars and famines of the greater world are reflecting back and forth with the wars and famines in each one of us. And no matter how skilled we become, we all have that to some degree. And whether you tie that in with those blockages or those illnesses that we discussed earlier, or just in a general sense, that it's such a powerful concept. And once again, learning to live life more and more as a living, loving art, being more and more mindful. That term mindfulness is such a popular term, and I'm really happy with that in our popular culture these days, especially in health and wellness circles. That's really catching on how important that is. It doesn't just have to be meditative. Meditation doesn't have to be sitting down. Meditation can be all of the time. I mean, if I'm speaking to someone, it's potentially like I'm speaking to you. And I'm not saying any of us are perfect at it, but I can learn to mindfully, it's like a speaking, it sounds silly, but a speaking qigong in a sense where I'm mindfully, carefully, not in pins and needles careful, but really trying to be mindful about how and what I say. Once again, am I perfect at it? No. But the point is there's always room for improvement. And driving down that street, as I was addressing, what if we could just realize all the stuff that we never noticed, every little miracle. And that relates to, and I hope this makes sense, okay, is what I'm kind of leading up to here is that there's really another important, as with many important concepts in the philosophy or the book, is the true appreciation of the miracle of the moment. Well, that philosophy is so congruent with the notion of mindfulness and realizing that every moment, and I mean so literally, I know that word literal is overly used, but I'm going to use it anyway. I mean that so literally that I mean just the fact that you and I right now can be talking on this phone. I'm on the phone, you're there, and we can communicate in this benevolent way, the selfless way, or just be breathing, living beings doing that. That's a miracle. I mean, as you read in my book, just the fact that we're on this planet that's traveling through space, and everything seems to be working in clockwork, and all the other stuff that we've spoken of, and then the stuff we haven't even addressed. These are all blessings. Each breath, each moment is truly a miracle. And we don't see it that way, though, most of us. And, even after 40-some years, some hour of the day or 50 years of practicing these arts, I may not be quite as aware of that as I would be. And I'm not proud of that. I try really hard. But at least we can try to recognize that if we're aware of these types of dynamics, that we can be appreciative and of the wonderful blessings at our disposal. And it becomes more and more special the more loving and benevolent and selfless or altruistic. And that's part of that whole concept of the spine-tingling, sparkling feelings and promote, whether we get them spontaneously. I mean, why is it when we get listening to a song that we loved as a teenager, or a movie we are watching, or a special moment with a significant other, we'll get those feelings? Well, those are openings, in a sense, to greater things. Anyway.
Absolutely. And we're coming from, part of why we get those is because we're operating in an area that we have control, which is being objective and really embracing the experience.
Those moments, and I hesitate to use the word sentimental moment, because sentimentality isn't exactly the same thing as being mindful and what you just said, but it seems in people that have it spontaneously happen, it often seems to be in those moments. But at that, we like to believe that there's a split second there, or just a moment somehow, where it's what you just said. It's a glimpse, a true objective insight, just for a moment, that creates that glimpse, that feeling. And, meditation, like I said, doesn't have to be just sitting on a stool. It could be a meditative moment that, anyway, I think.
And I'm going to briefly touch just a moment here on something as well to bring that in, where people struggle sometimes with getting the mind blank or getting the mindfulness or getting down to realizing, yes, man, the fact of how breath works is a miracle.
Oh, sure.
And a thing. The way the stars sit in the sky is an amazing thing. I mean, if we just look around us, what it took to grow a tree is an amazing thing. But really, you bring up a point in Chapter 4, which is focus the mind succinctly on just one thing versus many things. And this is another thing that happens today where people are multitasking. They're doing 10 things at once. And what we need to do is we need to just stop. And one of the things that I learned that can be a great training exercise, which brings you into that mindful space, is to sometimes look at something from a distance, for example. Like if I look at a tree from across my yard, and then I get closer to the tree and I look at a specific branch on the tree, and then I narrow it down to the leaf on the tree and how the veins run through the leaf on the tree. And these things help our mind focus in and get down to that singular thought sometimes. It's just one of the things I use.
Oh, exactly. In fact, it's strange you bring that up. Now, it's yin to yang slightly, but one's your way is complementary of the other way, and they're, in my mind, they're equal effectiveness. But we actually have a form of meditation where, once again, sounds a little bit out in left field, but it is what it is, where you learn to meditate or try to focus on one thing versus many things. The goal of focusing on one thing is eventually no thing or nothing. In other words, learning to empty your mind. But the point is that when we have this, I was taught is when you look at a tree, instead of, it's what we call not focusing, or part of the witnessing thing, and it makes just as much sense the way you said it. But what we are taught is to look, not stare at the tree, but it's kind of like when you look at a star at night, and if you look just to the side of the star, or try not to stare at the star, you actually see the star better. Well, it's the same thing with the tree. If you look at a tree and gaze, and instead of staring at it, you kind of start to learn to witness the empty spaces between the limbs and the leaves of the tree. And what sounds a little bit out in left field maybe is that you can learn to kind of see the witness, and what in like in Indian Sanskrit they call it the third eye, and in Mandarin Chinese we call it the yin tong point, just in the same spot, and use the spiritual eye versus the physical eye. Nothing wrong with the physical eye, and learn to kind of witness the bioelectric energy, and that sort of thing. In Western terminology, they might call it a halo or aura. And it's not that that's so much important into itself, but it does require some level of witnessing, which is exactly what you were addressing. So not to go on, but that was really cool that you mentioned the tree thing. So.
Well, and those empty spaces, that's the thing that people forget about. That's like those psychological diagrams where, do you see this face or do you see this other thing? And
that's what abstract art, to some degree, is based on looking, that sort of thing. So, from what I understand.
If you're so busy looking at a particular thing, you miss what else is there.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I meant with
empty spaces are big.
How often when we're driving down a street, we've driven down 1,000 times, do we really know that street or that experience? In fact, sometimes we try to run away from the actual experience and just want to, as they say, get from point A to point B, having one's eye on the destination versus enjoying the journey. When a lot of people go on vacation, and we're all probably guilty of this on some level, but they always have the notion of getting there versus enjoying getting there. And it may sound outrageous to enjoy through standing in lines at an airport or whatever, but those still things are, the fact that we can do those things in each moment is like a miracle, that we're living, breathing beings being able to do that and communicate and decide how we're going to treat people, that we interact with. So, anyway.
It's funny, people oftentimes don't understand why I love the absolute stillness of the night, like in the wee morning hours when there's nobody moving around, everybody's still asleep.
That's what I'm doing right now, sitting outside.
It's those very things where there's so much in that stillness that there's such a connection and so much in that stillness. And people are missing it. They don't get a chance to experience it because they're always focused on the busyness. Glen, I want to give you a chance to share with us, again, the title of your book, how people can contact you, where they can get your book from.
It's A Glimpse of Heaven, The Philosophy of True Health. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, many bookstores. If a bookstore doesn't have it, it can be ordered. It's on a lot of other sites, too numerous to mention. And my immediate business websites are the ones you mentioned were MasonCityTaiChi.com and MasonCityWellnessCenter.com. All my contact information, like email and phone numbers and all that, are on those sites. And there's also my blog is A Glimpse of Heaven. On WordPress is A Glimpse of Heaven, The Philosophy of True Health at WordPress.com. And there's so many others, but those are the main ones. Is that what you want?
And we do have at least two of those at the bottom of the show description for people as well. And Glen is around on social media as well if you want to connect with him, Facebook, LinkedIn. He's involved in several of the groups there as well. So if you're enjoying his work, feel free to connect with him. Send him an email. Jump in and connect with him through his pages on Facebook. I know that will help him out. And he's just a wealth of insight and information there as you get to talk with him. And, Glen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I know it goes by fast. I turn around, I'm having a conversation 1 minute, and the next minute I'm looking up going, I've got to wrap up the show.
No, and I don't say this lightly in any way. It's a privilege and a pleasure and an honor, Jesse. It truly is.
And very much likewise, Glen, and it's been a true privilege to have you here because you bring in some of these wonderful concepts. And, when I've looked at your stuff, it always brings me back to some very fond memories of when I delved into a couple of different martial arts courses and things when I was younger, and it really was an enriching part of that time of my life. And like you say, there's so many different areas and ways of health, and we really, really appreciate having you on here tonight. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Jesse.
And moving forward, we've been talking with Dr. Glen Hepker tonight, and it's been a privilege to have him here on the show. If you've missed any part of it, I do encourage you to go back and listen in the archives and catch what you have missed. Next week, I've got Keith Gregory coming on, and he's going to be talking about the sacred masculine and heart tantra. And that is also going to represent 1 year for Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour, being on the air here on Main Street Universe. So it's actually going to be my anniversary show, and Keith is going to be wrapping up a series of men guests that I've had on my show. And so that's very exciting. Keith is a dear friend of mine from many years ago, and I know he's going to have a wealth of information to share. His work with the sacred masculine will not only help men out there tune into different aspects of themselves that sometimes society represses or pushes aside, but it's also going to help women get a better understanding of men and how to deal with them. And he's got some very unique concepts with the heart tantra techniques as well. So you definitely want to tune in. Talk about another person with a wealth of information. We're talking about another at least 25, 35 years of experience tapping in there in the work he does. Now, my next set of books are based on relationships, and I am working on getting those out. I'll continue to keep you posted on those. And it's a look at how we all take on masculine and feminine energy roles, no matter what sex we're born into. And I'm working on putting together a compassion tour for 2014. So again, piece by piece, I'm putting little pieces in. I will be doing the recording out in Santa Barbara early March. And anybody who's out in that area, or if you're going to be in that area, you're more than welcome to contact me through my email, which is Jessie@JessieAnnNicholsGeorge, and stay up on that event, because you are welcome to go in and watch the show being taped in there. And I'm going to be adding, like I said, book signings and some other things right at that time as well there in the southern and central coast of California, and hopefully even going up to the north coast of that. We'll see how everything falls into place. You can definitely learn more about the work I'm doing with Compassion. Connect with me, check out my blog, purchase products or services that I offer, find ways to connect with me, listen to archived shows, watch video tips, find out what upcoming shows I have going on. You can do all of that through my website at JessieAnnNicholsGeorge1, that's number1.com. And there's also a great section there, again, for Main Street Universe, where you can follow all of our hosts and catch upcoming shows as well as our archive shows and learn a little more about the people here on Main Street Universe. That's all listed at the bottom of my show description. My books in Compassion are available on Amazon.com, CreateSpace, BarnesNoble.com, and through Smashwords as an ebook as well, which includes Kindle and PDF versions. I do have a special running this month for the month of September, and that is where you can get two of my online courses. If you pay for two of them, you get a third one absolutely free. And you can email me once you've signed up for the other two courses and completed them. You can email me and let me know what course you want to take for free as well. There's some amazing things. I have an entire chakra series that's going on with that. You can check out all of the courses, and it can be courses that have already happened, but the recordings are still there for you as well. You can check these out at learnitlive.com/invite/JessieAnnNicholsGeorge. I've also got things there honoring the moon cycles. I'm going to have an autumn equinox celebration coming up that's part of those courses. So it's very interesting. Most of them are in the $10 to $25 range, so they're very cost-effective for people. This is something new that I've just added in and started providing for people. Don't forget, I also have Jessie's Quantum Club, and you can learn more about that through jessiesquantumclub.eventbrite.com, and there's a video on there that explains a little bit about that. Also, don't forget that we've got several shows here on Main Street Universe throughout the week. Sunday nights we have Darren Bouquet, who's a reader at Madame Laveau in New Orleans, doing spiritual insights. So he delves into a little bit of a topic. Lately he's been sharing different tarot spreads that he's been laying out, and he also does readings on the air. So if you'd like to get a really great reading, Darren Bouquet does that. And also Monday nights we have Kevin Baird walking on the sidewalk, and he does his Horizon Oracle Journeys deck, which is a deck he created. You can learn more about that through his website at templeofgaia.com. Tuesdays we now have Susan Weed, who is sharing her work in herbs and natural plants. So she's doing some various things. She's got a series right now going on about teas, making herbal teas. And then Wednesday nights are our flagship show. We have Daniel, Janice, and Brett on that show. Sometimes they've got guests, sometimes they're doing readings. They kind of do a little variety of different things there. And then, of course, Friday nights is Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. And this is Jessie Ann Nichols George. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. I would look forward to seeing you back here next week as we delve more into Activating Compassion. Don't forget that if you've enjoyed my show this evening, or if you've missed any part of it, make sure that you share it with others, and you can catch it in the same link at our archives and listen to it at your convenience. I'm going to be leaving you with the song tonight called Yearning For, also known as Over and Over, which is by Shamshad, a group that opened our show up. And again, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again next week right here on Activating Compassion in the Midnight Hour. May you enjoy the rest of your weekend and have an amazing week.
And if I could see what makes me blind, I would soar to the edge of my mind and to touch what seems unreal, just to show you the way that I feel. And we are in time with time, one with the season of change inside. And we are in tune with the tune, caught in a balance of sun and moon. Oh, deep inside, the light within, shining to show you it's here to begin. When all I have is all I need, I will soar to the edge of eternity. And we see it eye to eye, one within love to be for the divine. And we're walking hand in hand, caught in the balance of God and man. Over and over, life is your lover, learning to walk just a little bit slower, whispering secrets that you can't keep it. No turning back now, this time we reveal it. One to another, all will discover the essence within the most beautiful lover. Time is still turning, the love is still burning. Deep in your spirit, your heart is still yearning for. Yearning for. When all we have is all we need, all that we ask for shall be received. And we see it eye to eye, one within love to be for the divine. And we're walking hand in hand, caught in the balance of God and man. And we are in time with time, one with the season of change inside. And we are in tune with the tune of life in the circle and love in bloom. Over and over, life is your lover, learning to walk just a little bit slower, whispering secrets that you can't keep it. No turning back now, this time we reveal it. One to another, all will discover the essence within the most beautiful lover. Time is still turning, the love is still burning. Deep in your spirit, your heart is still yearning for. Over and over, life is your lover, learning to walk just a little bit slower, whispering secrets that you can't keep it. No turning back now, this time we reveal it. One to another, all will discover the essence within the most beautiful lover. Time is still turning, the love is still burning. Deep in your spirit, your heart still yearns.